here today.
Okay, guys, we're going to get started. We're going to get started on the Planning Sustainability Commission hearing on February 24th, 2015. Today is a work session. Today we have first call to order, items of interest from the commissioners. Then we'll have consent agenda. And then introduction of our work session agenda. There's two items. Eric would do an introduction. The first is David Douglas School District, and that's slated for about an hour today. And the second is community involvement policies, and that's slated for an hour plus today. Following the work sessions, we will start the transportation plan hearing. Public testimony will be taken for this topic, and we have testimony cards available in the back room if you're here to testify on the TSP, Transportation System Hearing Plan. That'll be actually our third item in the hearing. And we'll have a presentation, and then we will take testimony until about 9 o'clock tonight. So it's it's a long day. Yeah.
Later.
We want to make sure that for the hearing that people have an opportunity. So please fill out a card if you're here to testify and give it to Julie. We'll call you up. As always, written testimony for the entire comp plan is open through March 13th, 2015, and people can continue to send in their comments. Items of interest from the commissioners. Karen?
Thank you, Andre. I just wanted to mention that Andre and I are going to make some time to meet with the East Portland Action Plan Housing Committee, and we're also going to have some conversation with the Vision Midway Alliance, also around the issues around housing, and we want to hear what folks have to say, and I think it's a really important conversation, so I'm pretty excited about that. The other thing for the commission is I was invited onto the Senate Bill 215 OEIB committee. It's a Senate committee on education, and they are meeting on Tuesday nights throughout the month of March. So there just may be a meeting that I might have to miss here in order to make sure that I get representation there. And I just wanted to mention that.
Maggie?
Can you be sure to share when you're meeting with East Portland Action Plan, if other commissioners could join in?
Yeah.
I was thinking about reaching out as well, so that would be great to combine.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Other items of interest? I just want to correct something I said at the beginning. There's actually three items. There's two work session items, and then the third item is actually a hearing for the Transportation Systems Plan, and that is for public testimony. So the first two items, there is no testimony. It's a work session for us as commissioners for David Douglas and the public involvement. Joe?
Just a few items. One is just let everyone know that I believe it was last week, Chair Baugh and Karen Gray and Howard Shapiro were reappointed to the Planning and Sustainability Commission for a term of 15 years. It did pass. It did pass. It did pass. So congratulations. And secondly, just on the hearing tonight, the order of business, we have the work sessions, 5 o'clock. Food is actually arriving. There'll be a break. We're going to open up the cards for testimony at 4:30, so 30 minutes before the hearing. There's been some confusion around that, so I wanted to make that clear. And that's it for me.
Okay. Consent agenda, meeting minutes from 2/10/15 meeting. Second, moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nope. Passes. Eric.
Thank you. I'm just going to be here for a few minutes before turning it over to Deborah, just to reorient you to where we are in the overall process. You probably remember that this is the not the first of your long work sessions, and it's actually the third. We still have, beyond tonight, we still have a session scheduled on March 10th where you will actually have a work session on what you heard from the Transportation System Plan hearing. And you'll also be talking about housing and residential designations at that time. And then we have a March 24th session scheduled, which is our cleanup session. And I can tell you right now that that's close to being filled with the items that we've already polled and indicated interest in discussing further. So probably next time, before the next session, we will figure out whether we need to add additional sessions or where we are in the overall schedule, but we haven't done that yet, but we're kind of on that cusp. A few reminders about the just what we're doing here. You will be reviewing staff reports, and Deborah will talk to you about the specifics, but remember that some of the staff reports have general directional things that we're asking for, and others have lists of particular items in the form of things we want you to talk about or consent items. And so there is additional, that's sort of the purpose of that cleanup session on March 24th, is to handle that overflow and the things that you pull from consent. So as with the previous reports, you may do that, or you may hold things over. Andre, you mentioned it, but the public comment period remains open, at least in writing, through March 13th. So we're still accepting email and written comments and map app comments through that date. And obviously at today's Transportation System Plan hearing related to the TSP. As of today, we have 3,236 public comments collected. So we continue to work through those at the staff level and generate recommendations where it's appropriate. I think that's all I wanted to mention. I guess also just one last thing is that we still also have our helpline open, which is 503-823-0195. If the public has questions about any of the proposals, they can call that number and get information from staff. I think with
curiosity, is there a follow-up? I know when I go online, how to go, or anything like that. I know you've got plenty to do already. I'm curious if there's feedback. Hey, you guys did a good job.
Do you mean in terms of the phone calls,
Yeah,
or? I don't know. That's a
Yeah, we haven't done a formal kind of survey like that or inquiry, but we actually have gotten some good feedback because our helpline staff sometimes will spend an hour on the phone with somebody really explaining it, so people have written back and said, thank you, I actually really appreciate that. So I think we've gotten some informal feedback that's been, but it's a nice idea to really do a little more systematic appraisal. We think it's been a very successful pilot, and we definitely want to. Oh no!
Yeah.
I didn't say anything important enough to repeat.
I need to
No,
re-ask
I think
the
it's a nice
question, too.
it's a nice thing to do to solicit more formal because
Yeah.
we think this has been a good experiment, and we'd like to formalize it as one of our best practices in the
well,
future.
you put a huge amount of effort into it, and it sounds pretty amazing. So just be nice to get a little pat on the back or suggestion.
or find out what we could do better. Yeah.
I guess the other lesson learned is on the map app piece of it, we now have ample evidence that style of outreach does increase the amount of testimony that that you all get, and so and probably increases the range of testimony you're getting as well. So I think we would see that as an expansion of public involvement. Right?
So I'm going to invite up Bob Glasscock and Superintendent Don Grotting to join me for the first of the two work sessions. So as Eric mentioned, we've got two work sessions. Both are based on staff reports you received on February 11th. So the first will be about David Douglas School District, and we'll be talking about how we have some proposals of a general approach to what the city could do, what one of the city's levers is to help collaborate with David Douglas School District to help address some of the capacity issues. So we'll focus on that one item. And as Eric said, in this case, it's not a series of amendments like some of the other work sessions where we're ticking through. In this case, it's looking to you for a general nod. Does this approach sound good to pursue? And we would take that direction and then follow up with some of the details. So that's what we'd be looking to you for in that session. This session will be followed by community involvement, and I'll introduce Marty Stockton at that point to present that. And again, we'll look to you for some particular direction, in that case with some staff proposals to respond to some particular testimony. So we'll be looking to you again for some nods. Is this the right direction? So again, a little different than some of the other work sessions where it's more detailed, but we will be pausing at each decision point to say, does this direction sound like what you'd recommend we pursue? And if not, how would we modify that? So that's what we'll be looking to you for. And I think I'll turn it over. I think we can skip the other slide because we've already talked about that. So, yeah. So again, this is, we've already talked about this. These are generally what we ask you at each work session, but in this case, it'll be a little different. So Bob Glasscock.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to present the staff report and really hone in on one of the two discussion questions which we would like your nod for. And just a little bit of history is back in October, you recall that Don Grotting and others talked about the overcrowding in David Douglas schools. And they were asking that the city slow down the housing development, the pace of housing development with the comp plan update we're doing. So today we want to talk about how a possible collaboration between the city and David Douglas School District. And I'll remind you that in Portland Plan, there was the spirit of collaboration between school districts and the city, and we're continuing to pursue those avenues in many ways. I was fortunate to be invited in by the David Douglas School District last spring with their advisory committee on putting together a 10-year school facility plan. They're still putting together the details of that, and we're looking forward to seeing that. But some of the key facts that I'd like to share with you have to do with, they've told us that 4 of their elementary schools, Gilbert Heights, Gilbert Park, Lincoln Park, and Mill Park, exceed their target enrollment of 600 students, again for an elementary school. And they project that by 2033, sort of the life of the comprehensive plan, over 800 students, they project over 800 students at 2 elementary schools. So those would be 200 students over the capacity for those individual schools. And the state in 2007 provided an avenue. They closed the opportunity for short-term school moratorium, but they opened the door for collaborations between school districts and cities and counties, the land use agencies. What they did was they said if a school district would put together a long-range facility plan and as part of that adopt some objective criteria for what school capacity means to them, that as part of the city's periodic review, that is when they're updating the comprehensive plan, then we must include their facility plan in our comprehensive plan. We must also cooperate with them in identifying new school sites, land for school sites. And third, we must accept and apply school district objective criteria and apply them to approve or deny comprehensive plan amendments and amendments to residential land use regulations. In doing some research, we find that several Portland area school districts have adopted 10-year school facility plans, and at least one case they've collaborated with their local land use agency, that is Washington County, between that and Beaverton School District, in adding schools as a required service for the purpose of reviewing land use reviews. So in a sense, you could say, if the school district says, no, we do not have capacity to accommodate the additional housing growth requested in this application, that could be the basis for denying that particular land use application. So what we're really asking you today, the main question we need some nod for, is whether you like this idea of a collaborative approach for the city in a selective way to work with the school district to adopt some objective criteria and then apply them for zoning map amendments. I'd also mention that we also have a discussion question relating to how the city might help or work with the school district to find and acquire new school sites. We don't have a specific recommendation on that, but if you want to give any direction or feedback to the two parties here, then that would be helpful feedback as well. There was one question relating to setting up the school service letter process that the Bureau of Development Services had as part of their testimony. I've met with Development Services, had them clarify their issue, and then turned to Don and his team. And Don assures me that the school district can respond in the timely manner needed for case responses on zoning map amendments. So I think that we've answered the question that Development Services had on that kind of arrangement. With that, I'd like to just kind of step back and ask if you have questions or if you would like to have. Oh, right. Also, the staff report addresses for the program portion of this. On March 10th, you'll be having the residential densities staff report, and as part of that, there will be some mapping proposals for your comment. And so that would set up the situation where you might have the comprehensive plan, plan designation in here allowing this many units, and the current zoning allowing fewer units, and then that sets up a process of going through a zoning map amendment process, and for David Douglas to comment yes or no, we have adequate capacity. So the mapping discussion will be in a few weeks, March 10th. And then in terms of the details of if you say you like this idea, I would be working with our code team for the Task 5 housekeeping, where we just work out all the nitty code changes to the code to operationalize that. Would you like to make some comments?
Chair Baugh, Commissioners, I just want to first of all say thank you for taking the time to listening to concerns specifically with David Douglas, and then publicly just to acknowledge the city and their efforts in trying to help us solve their problem. And by the way, if any of you have any land in David Douglas that you would like to, seriously though, we have been in contact with the city, the county, Parks and Recreation, and looking at buying property, as well as we do have a piece of property on Deerdorf that we are even willing to possibly trade. So we're looking at every avenue, and part of the facility plan was the number one thing is that you need to look at any and all available land to purchase for further site developments for elementary schools, middle school, and if we ever decide to split our high school. So we've done that. The district did just purchase a piece of property on Halsey Street. It was the Elks property. But once again, it'll be a while before we have the monetary funds in which to develop that land, but we do have land. But there's David Douglas is about 12 square miles, and there's just not a lot of large pieces of land available. So I just want to thank each of you for your consideration, and especially for, I heard you talking about East Portland and coming to East Portland, and I hope your sandwiches are good tonight. I was with Superintendent Gray at 7 o'clock this morning, so I know it's going to be a long day for her. But thank you for all you do, and I know you have some difficult situations and political entities coming at you from every which direction. So I'm willing to ask any and all questions as
Superintendent, we're going to start with Dr. Gray. And
Yeah, I have two. Hi, Don. I have two. We know each other well. I have two questions for Superintendent Grotting. One of them is if you could take just a moment to explain to the commission how this overcrowding has affected some of your work in your school district, given the amazing overload of requirements that we have as educators today. And then I'll ask a second question after that.
Okay. So I'm going to try to, I think I'm going to answer your question. One of the things that we have right now, we have no available classrooms, elementary classrooms in our district. So what that means is we have kindergarten class sizes of 33 and 34, and which is unacceptable. You know, we have core classes in our middle school and high school of 40, and we have physical education classes of upwards of 70 kids, which does not create great environments. I think our people are working as hard as they can, but we literally, if we want to add any type of educational support right now to our classrooms, it has to come in the form of an instructional assistant. But it's getting to the point right now, I hope nobody knows the fire marshal, we can't get any more desks in our rooms. But when the buildings were built, they were built classrooms of approximately 900 square feet, and they're literally, we're looking for smaller teacher desks so we can put more student desks in there. And that does not lend to a great environment. And then also, I know we talked just about the school capacity, but also when some of these housing developments come in, as you know, I believe East Portland, as in, I think Superintendent Gray could talk to this, we're lacking some of the other services that come to support the academic environment, all the way from safety and fire and law enforcement to just having places, food places to where our citizens, sidewalks and all of that. So it's a complex deal, but I always try to look at my glasses half full. At least our district, you know, we're not declining enrollment, so we do have that. And I will tell you, we've tried to, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We put a moratorium on open enrollment and interdistrict transfers. So it used to be we would take anybody and everybody that wanted to come to David Douglas. We can no longer do that. And right now, we currently have kids in our neighborhood schools who are being bused to other schools because our target grade levels are over. So imagine if you would move into a school, into an elementary school catchment area thinking that, boy, my kid's going to be close to my school, and what's happening if they're new to the area and their class that they're going to is over the target area, they're actually being bussed out of their home enrollment area to another school. So it's a difficult problem, but working with these folks, we are entering into long-range planning development that hopefully we're going to alleviate some of those. Another thing that we're doing this year, we did pass a bond, and but we're not even using bond money for this. We're using some of our general fund money. We're building 4 additional classrooms in the Cherry Park area, but they will already be full and already at their target area just from growth. So.
Thank you for that explanation. And I will also point out to the commission that David Douglas School District enjoys very high academic achievement while they are incredibly squeezed. And so kudos to you, Don, for the work that you've done in your school district. The second question I have is, we talked about objective criteria that could be developed in order to kind of allow or disallow development. Can you give some suggestions as to what you think some of that objective criteria might be?
Well, an example I've seen in Washington County, working with Beaverton School District, has to do with square footage, and there's a formula that they use, so per school formula, and so the analysis would be on a school within that school catchment area of the proposed development. I don't have the formula in front of me, but it is based on I believe it's the square footage of the classroom. It does not include a lot of the, the cafeteria and of those other
So
spaces.
that's square footage per as
student,
it relates to per student.
Per student, yes.
Okay.
But we also want to make sure we build in a way to say, let's say if you were proposing to build a senior housing complex that wasn't going to generate any new students, that would not be precluded from having a zoning amendment approved, because, so we really want to tie, and there's going to be something about, how many bedrooms. There are going to be certain assumptions we make based on, bedrooms and unit size and so forth, with some assumptions of what's the student generation from that unit, in the same way that we do traffic assumptions about uses generating some number of trips. There'd be some kind of formula that would be applied, but it would be a common sense approach so that we wouldn't, preclude a senior housing project, for example.
And I was just going to say, as part of the school district's facility planning process, they engaged Portland State Pop Center to update their enrollment. And as part of that, they also looked at the most likely number, how likely it would be to have school-age kids by housing type that we provided through our growth scenarios report. And so there have been some efforts to sync those in terms of what the city anticipates the building types to be by zone, by location, with the demographics that Portland State implies in terms of, and then they also, I think, have a factor for, based on the backgrounds of the population as to what the family size might be. And for instance, in David Douglas, I believe there are larger families generally with some of the communities of color, and that needs to be accounted for.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just want to also reiterate that we're looking at really a two-pronged strategy to address David Douglas school enrollment issues. And one is a larger issue for primarily Powellhurst-Gilbert neighborhood, where we're actually looking to down-designate, to change the designation to say, because of the absence of the supporting infrastructure and connectivity and so forth, there are a number of reasons why there are parts of Powellhurst-Gilbert where we're proposing to down-designate. And you'll hear a lot more detail about that on March 10th. And that does help reduce some of the enrollment pressure on David Douglas, but it's not, that proposal that staff's making isn't solely because of school capacity, it's because of this combination of factors. Where we see places that are suitable at that higher designation, except for the pressure on the school district, that's where we're proposing to implement this zoning map amendment process, where the school district would be allowed to sort of sign off and say, yes, the adequate capacity exists. So both of those strategies work together. And again, you'll hear more about the map proposals in detail at your March 10th. But tonight, or today, we're looking to just get a general nod that these approaches make sense to apply where the city has some leverage to affect school enrollment in a way that could help ease some of that pressure.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, I actually started out mildly skeptical about this approach, primarily because I could imagine people coming in and saying, we want to downzone our area because we want to slow down growth. And I could just see that kind of being I don't know, a slippery slope or whatever, but I'm really impressed with the memo, and I'm impressed with the fact that you've delineated the legal background for this, so that it isn't just willy-nilly trying to slow growth, but it's a very well thought out, and it has a legal basis. I also like the fact that, if I understood it, the memo correctly, that in the future, if your capacity were met, then you go back and can reconsider the zoning based on that improvement in capacity. I am curious, though, because we did hear at an earlier hearing, and in the memo, it's noted that I think Park Rose is under capacity, and you guys are over capacity, and there is a reference in there about districts working together. What's the reality of that on the ground? Is that something that has some potential for addressing some of these issues, capacity issues?
Well, once again, I think it's a more complex issue than it sounds like. Because
No, it sounds pretty damn complex. That's why I want to know on the ground reality.
The bottom line, and I think Karen could expand on this. It comes down to funding. At one point, when they were closing Marshall High School, they came to David Douglas and they wanted David Douglas to take it over, and we said, well, we would be willing to take that over, but can we do a boundary change? Could we do a boundary change? And that takes the vote of each school district to agree to that, and there was a very small percentage of those parents in Marshall who really wanted that to happen, but I would probably say that the greater part of the Portland Public School District would not be in agreement with that, because they would be losing that tax base and those issues. But I do know, I'm talking, like we're right next door, I think, correct me if I'm not correct, Karen, I believe that Park Rose has the land and the capability to provide additional housing, and we say build on, yes. Okay, thank you.
Don?
Bob, on the process and how we're going to improve communication between the city and the district, it sounds like we're migrating towards what I'd call a service provider letter. Mm-hmm. When you do a land use, you propose a development, part of your requirement in the submittal is to obtain a service provider letter from the district. And so on the district side, they'd have a team who'd respond to these applications, and A, they'd be well informed of what the student population is going to be and how it might change, and B, they can react to it and see if they can suit the need. Now, one thing I would encourage you to do as you kind of refine that approach of service provider letter, don't just do land use actions. A lot of kids live in apartments, and you can build an apartment complex without going through a land use process many times, especially if it's a series of smaller apartments. And so I would adjust the lens on that whole requirement and make sure that those are incorporated into it. And then on the school site, the school site's a tough issue. The geography is limited out there about what you can do. My understanding is that most of the school sites, both in the city of Portland and in the David Douglas district, and probably Park Rose for that matter, carry a residential zone. And the school's a conditional use permit over that. And will that continue, or will there be a school zone, or Bob, will it be the same kind of program?
And we would continue with the conditional use. For most schools, we will, as part of the, correct me if I'm wrong, campus institutional project, we're looking at high schools as being included in the campus institutional plan map
Just their bigger facilities.
designation.
And that's correct for their comprehensive plan designation. We aren't ready yet to create a new school zone. It's been talked about in various times, and it's pretty complex. And so we have that on our list of things to consider in the future, but it's not an immediate step that we would be taking.
Well, in my sense is that the conditional use permit's a good process still. Just leave the underlying zoning alone and describe a school facility and its potential impacts and compatibility issues through the CUP process. Mm-hmm. I think those criteria are pretty sensible, and I tend to stick with those. I have a lot of experience in Washington County and in Beaverton, and what I've noticed in doing work out there is a lot of times there are boundaries of school districts that are different than boundaries of cities. And I know once the boundaries have been in place, Dawn, for a long time, it's tough to move them, but there is precedence for that. And so I like the fact that you're open to that and that other districts are open to that. And maybe pushing into the eastern limit of Portland for a service area might make sense based on the student population. I thought about Marshall High School. It's going to be kind of full for a couple of years while they remodel Franklin, but you know, what about after that? And so I think it's good that those kind of items are still on the decision-making table moving forward. And I acknowledge that Douglas is retired, is crowded. My wife is a recently retired third grade teacher at Gilbert Heights. She never had less than 30 students in her classroom. It's a very challenging environment to teach in, and I don't know how they do it, to be honest with you.
Doug, could I ask for clarification of something you said earlier about apartment buildings? Are you thinking that at the building permit stage, an apartment building would then have to also show the service provider letter or have it signed off?
My sense is that it's a good idea, and maybe over a certain number of units. If you come in with a fourplex, should you really do a service provider letter? Probably not. If you come in with 30 units, that's going to have an impact. That's a classroom full
So
of
you're
kids.
saying even if it's already zoned, the zoning is in place for 30 units, you would want to have that additional meter?
Yeah, and the reason I want it is primarily to be informative, so the district will know about it. I know, for example, when my wife was teaching at Gilbert Heights, probably 10 apartment complexes went up, and all of a sudden they all showed up September 1 for school. And so I think it's important that we understand where that student population is being generated and make sure it gets in the communication loop. There might not be specific requirements, but at least everyone's well informed.
Okay.
Is what I would say.
Okay, thank you for the
Thank you.
clarification.
Other questions? Maggie?
So you indicated that there wasn't yet a recommendation on how to identify additional properties to acquire. Did I hear that correctly earlier?
For the school district to acquire?
Yes.
Well, I might turn it over to Don. I think that's, would be part of their school facility plan, and it's not complete yet.
It's not it's not in formal written form yet, but we've met with the cities several different occasions, and we've met with the county, and they've been very helpful. And when properties come up, we're also, as there are several parks, and most of our schools are near a city park, and there's different pieces of land, and we've even talked about the opportunity to maybe trade some land or share some facilities and be able to do that. So those conversations are taking place, but sometimes the wheels of bureaucracy turn slow.
And I think just in general, we're committing to collaborate in any way we can, city staff with the school district. So even if it's not finding a site, maybe it's looking at opportunities that we may know about or figuring out ways to leverage resources. So I think that we're trying to offer sort of a general assistance in whatever capacity we can to work in that.
Yeah, and I definitely support that, but I think it really speaks to what the city should be doing in terms of land banking and really looking at properties, not both for schools in your district, but as well as looking at issues of housing citywide. So I think it's just something that the city really needs to hone in on and focus on in terms of meeting these needs.
We also have a number of policy statements, I think, in the Portland plan about schools as centers of community and really trying to make sure that they're not only located in places that are accessible, but offer multiple opportunities for all generations as community hubs, and so that schools can become more than just places of education. So location, accessibility, piggybacking onto other facilities, co-locating, all those kinds of concepts we'd like to really encourage, and any way that we can make those opportunities come alive, we'd like to help with that as well.
Other comments? Don?
Yeah, just one question for the commission. You know, how does this influence what we're going to do in the near-term future on comp plan designations and zoning in East County. Are we going to, are there going to be adjustments to those designations? Are there going to be asterisks that might identify potential school sites? Is that where we're going?
Well, you'll certainly be looking at adjustments to densities that help
Okay.
address. We aren't proposing at this stage to put asterisks on potential school sites.
Yeah, that might offend some people. that-
Yeah.
Well, and it would actually make it more difficult for the district to
Exactly,
negotiate going forward.
exactly.
So
So
it's
I
better
think
to have it
where
open.
we have some influence on this is where we can affect density and adjust of residential densities that
Okay.
that can help relieve some of that pressure. And you'll see that again on March 10th.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Karen?
I just had just a couple of comments, because you finally hit on something I know. So it's kind of fun to sound intelligent for a change. But, Gene DeMaster, who's from Human Solutions, they're building a property that is a block into David Douglas. That would be an opportunity to change a boundary between David Douglas and Park Rose, and not doing this on the spot, Don. Believe me.
My board will be happy.
Believe me. We don't work on our own. Believe me, we have boards. Yeah, seriously. But it is literally within a block of David Douglas, and on the other side of the block is Park Rose, and it's going to have kids in it. That's an example of Dawn and I getting together, or maybe our boards getting together, and having a conversation about boundary change to accommodate certain times when those kinds of things happen, because that's a benefit to my district and would be a benefit to his as well. So I just like us to keep those in mind. The other thing is, this collaborative approach would be something I would really, really like to see happen, but keep it open for future districts in the future in the city of Portland. We touch 6 different districts. And so this is a 20-year plan or a 25-year plan. Keep it open for other school districts that also may end up bucking up against capacity issues, so that it is not district-specific.
Absolutely.
It's about school districts, but it can be open to other things. And we are talking to an outfit called Home First Development about they want to build 1,000 affordable housing units, not in David Douglas, but in Park Rose, Centennial, and Reynolds. And they do it a little differently. They're the ones that built the Irish Moss. That's Rob Justice and his crew. Be open to that as a city, that they do it a little different way maybe than other people. They're not really looking at huge profit margins. They build really pretty stuff that's environmentally friendly. And I would like to see some zoning changes in Park Rose that allow for those kinds of densities. So when you talk about density, and you know about this, Deborah, so I know. We're going to have a zoning meeting next week.
Yeah.
And we're going to be getting together with our neighborhood associations to say, hey, there's area here. Let's do some building. Park Rose is open to that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's why I asked you about the deadlines for
Right.
zone changes.
Right, good.
A quick question. So does this look like a overlay? So it'd be an overlay service requirement that would be over the David Douglas district?
It sort of functions that way. I
Way,
think the
yeah.
proposal is if we keep the designation as is but lower the density, essentially, you can infer then a boundary in which we would then have this requirement apply, but it's an overlay for the school district, anything within the school district boundary where that zoning doesn't match the comprehensive plan designation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Don.
But the idea of this enhanced communication in a service provider letter, is that a citywide decision? Do all the districts have the benefit of that going forward?
Well,
For
potentially they
consistency?
would, but the state statute specifically says the school district has to adopt a facility plan with those objective criteria for school
Yeah,
capacity.
yeah.
And they have to demonstrate show that they have they're
information.
overcrowded. Yeah, they have to document by school. So there's a lot of documentation that, they have to do I've seen a lot of it with David Douglas. They're very close. So it would be open to other schools. You know, we've thought about what about some of the other East school districts, Centennial, Reynolds. They have a foot in Portland, but they also are in other jurisdictions, so it's a little more complicated, especially since their high schools are outside of the city. But potentially, you know, there could be something
So
done.
this is a good test case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I also mention that in the staff report, attachment A is our thoughts about potential areas of collaboration between school districts and the city, not limited to land use, but also just communications. And so we're hoping that the school district will kind of bite on the idea and we could come to terms. I mean, they're already, well, the concept is to have a voluntary memorandum of understanding between the two organizations about collaboration, the interest in collaborating. And then supportive of that would be intergovernmental agreements. And there already are some of those relating to in this case, school facilities, if they've adopted school plans. There's joint use of schools, and then there is safe routes to school. So those are the sort of legally binding commitments that are topic specific, where those two parties have, you know, will really want to commit to doing specific acts.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bob.
The other question or just comment I would say is that when you're looking at the service levels you were talking about, grocery stores, healthcare, some of those services, but I would also include transportation and talk about safe routes to schools and sidewalks and stuff. You may have capacity, but if the kids are walking over rocks and things, so I would, you know, it's good to hold us. We'll talk about transportation here in another couple hours, but yeah, you're welcome for that conversation. But I think holding the city to its commitments around safe routes to schools and TriMet and some other folks that, you know, getting better transportation in the area for even your increased capacity would be helpful also.
That's just a great idea, and every day I come to school, I'm praying the phone doesn't ring, because we have a middle school with nearly 800 and our two largest elementary schools, and the traffic flow in and out of those is, absolutely horrendous. Alisot Middle School, Gilbert Heights, and Gilbert Park. It's an accident waiting to happen, and the streets aren't even regulation. It would never pass, and there are no sidewalks on most of it. So it's that's a great point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Okay, so thank you. So it sounds, I just want to wrap up. It sounds like you have general support for this approach.
Yes.
We can use this combination of sort of some land use changes and this service letter. I like the idea of the communication to make sure the school district at a minimum knows what's coming. And so I'm hearing some support. There were a few other things in the staff report we didn't go over, but I thought that what we did talk about today was where we really needed some direction. So
we're all in agreement and with.
great. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you all for what you do.
Thank you.
Good luck tonight.
Good luck to you.
We ready to move on to our next item?
Yes, community involvement.
So I'm going to invite up Marty Stockton, who will be making this presentation. You can just go. Wrong notes.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Marty Stockton. I'm a city planner here with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And this afternoon, I have the pleasure of spending some time with you to talk about the community involvement policies. So I'm going to just give just a little bit of kind of background and context, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Essentially, there are 3 items that I've kind of pulled out and highlighted that I would like to talk with you about today. But of course, anything that has come up in the staff report or that you have seen in testimony, I'd be happy to discuss with you. And then another item is sometimes when we're going through the policy kind of slides, there's a desire to wait until we get to the end of the presentation. I'm going to be really flexible. So if you want to wait till the end of the presentation, that's fine. If you want to jump in and kind of talk about each item by item, I'm totally happy to do that as well. So this is really your time to talk about community involvement. So to give a little bit of context or background, we started this work back in, I would say, spring of 2012. We formed a community involvement policy expert group, an advisory committee that I collaborated with and wordsmithed with for a year. And during that time frame, we came out with the working draft part 1. That came out in January of 2013. Got some great feedback from the public as well as from the commissioners on that particular draft. So the community involvement PEG, Policy Expert Group, continued on through the June of 2013. So really helped shape the next draft of Chapter 2, Community Involvement. After the Community Involvement PEG ended their time, this work has continued. And so I've been really fortunate to work with the Public Involvement Advisory Council, which is actually one of your brother or sister commission or boards, in that they do advise City Council on community involvement citywide, so kind of best practices in public involvement. And so I have been meeting with them on a monthly basis throughout this time. And so they have been great advisors and very philosophical, working with me on this particular work. So I just want to give you some context on that. Additionally, back in August of 2010, the public involvement principles were adopted by City Council. And so when I started the work, my charge by BPS leadership was that I was to incorporate the city's public involvement principles into the comprehensive plan. With that direction, I also philosophically felt that to be true to the statewide planning goal 1 was something that I really wanted to bring into this draft. So anyway, that's a little bit of the foundation. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the 3 items that I'd like to highlight with you. And again, this is your time, so let's just, be flexible. Okay.
Good evening. Marty, would you make a distinction between the PIAC and the CIC and how they do or don't overlap so that the commission understands that these well-meaning committees sometimes kind of overlap each other, but they all are important in their own way?
So Howard, that's an excellent question. I'm glad that you brought that up. So the Community Involvement Committee, which is the Community Involvement Committee for, it actually started in the Portland Plan process and has continued with staff through the comprehensive plan, is actually charged to review the public involvement process for periodic review. So it's charged specifically within the confines of the update to the comprehensive plan as well as the Portland Plan prior. So that is the charge of the CIC. The Public Involvement Advisory Council, again, is a body that is appointed by City Council and advises City Council. So whereas the CIC advises staff and advises the Planning Commission, PIAC advises City Council on citywide public involvement best practices. And so their scope also includes all the bureaus and offices of the city. Okay, so let's start with item number 1. And it relates to promoting inclusive planning. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this with you today is because, number one, back in the Portland Plan, there is an action within the framework for equity on promoting inclusive planning. And so there is action item number 6 in the 5-year action plan that refers to really incorporating language and terms that are inclusive to non-geographic communities and communities of color into both the city charter and the city's comprehensive plan. So that is a legacy from the Portland Plan, specifically the framework of equity. And so I'm just would like to definitely get your affirmation that that is the direction that we want to go. We have heard quite a bit of testimony that, and this slide actually relates to the next slide, and so there's going to be a little bit of an iterative experience between the two topics. But we have heard some confusion about what the word community means. And so you'll note that Chapter 2 is titled the Community Involvement Chapter, whereas in the existing Goal 9 of our existing comprehensive plan, the title is Citizen Involvement, as well as the statewide planning goal, Goal 1, is Citizen Involvement. And so quite a few years ago, staff made the decision that we were going to be changing the term citizen to community because we feel like the term community is much more inclusive and that the term citizen can be exclusionary to certain groups within the city. So that was definitely a choice that we made. And you'll note that the CIC is the Community Involvement Committee. So I'm bringing this up because I think this is a really important thing to think about. And it's also important for us as staff and as decision makers that when we are using the word citizen, that we have kind of a reminder that that term could be excluding people from the conversation. So I wanted to bring that up. Another item
I'd like
is
to
that—
comment on that for a second if I could. So,
oh, please.
That makes me very sad. I understand why citizenship has become, potentially an exclusive term, and probably ultimately agree with the decision to shift to community. But to me, citizen has always implied a measure of active involvement in your community, and making your issues known and engaging with government. And I mourn losing that from the words that we're using. So I know why we have to go there, but I don't like it.
You know, Chris, I just want to acknowledge that because that is a conversation that has come up multiple times at PIAC as well as the Community Involvement Committee, and that the legacy of the word citizen is really beautiful, and that is, definitely something that we want all community members to strive for, but there is the acknowledgement that some folks do feel excluded, so I hear you. Another thing that came up in testimony is that, with this shift, there's been some confusion that when we use the word community, does that mean neighborhood associations or neighborhood groups? And so it's interesting because for me, the word community is like the word public, where it is really a word for everybody. And it is, in some ways, when we do have a list of groups where it's neighborhood associations, business associations, organizations, kind of the laundry list, that in some ways community is a way to just make sure that we haven't forgotten anyone else. It is, again, a very inclusive word. And so I think that there are definitely places within the document that we can tighten up how we are using the term community, but I just wanted to share that we really do intend for the word community to mean everyone.
Gary?
Thank you, Marty. And I'm fundamentally supportive of this, but one of the questions I've had, and this kind of, again, relates to my old career in public health, where community is really central to the whole process. Who gets to define community? And I'm kind of wondering about the thought framework that you use to approach the issue of community involvement, and who decides, because we do have
if you will, bureaucratically defined communities, neighborhood associations, areas, et cetera. And then we have self-defined communities and a whole mixture of other things. And so where does that fit into the conversation?
Actually ties well into
Yeah,
the next item we're going to
yeah.
talk about a little bit. Yeah.
Well, again, I do want to reiterate that community is very inclusive. I think that there is, and again, Deborah's right that this does tie into the next question. We did receive some feedback about who is entitled to participate. And, I think, it kind of goes back to what is the comprehensive plan and what is a legislative process and who gets to participate in the legislative process. And, for me, I feel like that opportunity is for everyone. And so, there is, on the next slide, in our implementing documents like the zoning code, there are limits on how people can participate in for example, who is notified. There are limitations based on state law and based on the zoning code on who we send notification to. And so I think that in so many different ways that we approach community involvement, whether it's notification, how we engage people at public meetings, how we engage people to where they are already at, so we go to where people are. I think I'm probably not answering your question. I'm a very circular talker, but I think that the definition of community and how we're engaging people and who is participating, I think we want to be inclusive in all the different ways that we engage the public. And so,
Yeah, and I think that includes formally recognized and sort of self-defined groups. And I think they both have, I think that's where we're sort of evolving in our thinking, is going from a framework, which we'll talk about in a minute, where we used to rely only on formally recognized groups, and we're moving towards a more inclusive framework that also allows some self-defined groups to be involved in a more formal way than we had in the past.
Mike? Oh,
Yeah,
go
thank
ahead,
you.
Gary. Go ahead.
Well, no, that actually, it's a really difficult topic, and I think it would be helpful to, as you go forth and revise the plans and the policies, to really try to reflect that idea that it's really about obtaining maximum appropriate involvement from formal and informal community, so that people understand what they're participating in. Community members, myself included, often think that, well, if I participate, I get to make the decision. And that's not exactly what you're saying.
We don't even get to make the decision.
So I think some clarity in that regard would be helpful, because it's a very difficult and confusing topic for folks.
thank you.
Mike?
Well, I had a reaction similar to Chris, and I fully support vote by mail in enfranchising more people, but I really miss going to the Chapman Elementary School and walking in, handing it, and I think there have been times when they say, Mike Hauk has voted or whatever. I really do miss that. And the community, I agree with what you're doing and the philosophy behind it, but the loss of the concept of the individual citizen, or the individual, in this case, taking responsibility. So to the extent that the definition can encompass explicitly the notion that it's not just a collective that has the opportunity for input, but individuals do, citizen or not. To use a Borg term.
Howard?
I'm hesitant to get into this because citizen to me kind of takes me back to Greece. It's kind of the admission that you got in Greece for being citizen good guy. But to me, the word around community involves the word participation. The ticket to being a member of a community is participating, and shouldn't be restricted to anything less than that. I think if you're willing to participate in an action, you're a member of that community, however you are seen. So in the homogenized world we live in, where citizen is no longer easily defined, especially around immigration, I think it's really important that we have that inclusive term. Community means individuals who participate make up a community. That's how I define it.
Mm-hmm. That is one thing in the partners and decision-making policy section of Chapter 2, we kind of go through the various groups, and the very first group that we start with is individuals. So that is a component of the chapter.
Great. Other questions?
Okay, good. This is going very well. Okay.
He's when I put on my toga.
No togas.
I'm that old. Yeah, I am that old.
So again, this next slide and topic is also very related. And then we did receive quite a bit of testimony, both from individuals and neighborhood associations, just questioning their role in the comprehensive plan and specifically in this chapter. I would say that the testimony spanned from just some clarification that neighborhood associations were wanting or a desire to be a little bit more acknowledged to, I guess, to the end of the spectrum where there was testimony that neighborhood associations wanted to be the only avenue or vehicle for community involvement for the comprehensive plan. So, definitely a spectrum within the neighborhood associations providing feedback. So the proposal, I would say, is in one of the previous drafts of this particular chapter, I had a very long historical account of public involvement in the city related to kind of the evolution of the neighborhood system. And that particular intro was rightfully so edited down. But that some of the edits did take out kind of the reference and the acknowledgement of the neighborhood system. And so within the staff report, there is a proposal for a new introduction that really kind of brings forth the acknowledgement of the neighborhood system in kind of a balanced manner with the direction of wanting to provide inclusive engagement and planning. So, at the same time wanting to honor our history and wanting to support our history, but also wanting to move forward in an equitable manner. Additionally, I would say, although it's not in the staff report, I just would like to acknowledge that for the working draft part 1, we received some excellent feedback from Commissioner Houck on, and we actually have a new goal on civic infrastructure, and I actually really love that term, and so I just like to give credit to Mike for that. And it's really this, that we do have this wonderful support of civic infrastructure in the neighborhood system, in the business associations, and of the diversity and civic leadership partners, and many new groups as well, and that we want to continue to support and expand and diversify the systems that we have in place and new systems that have yet to come.
Chris?
So I've had the pleasure of serving as a neighborhood association board member, officer, committee chair. I'm not sure if any of my other colleagues have had that pleasure. I definitely want to support acknowledgement for the neighborhood system, but having worked in it, I understand who uses that as a forum for input and who does not. The people who don't show up in that forum are very important as well. But I have some concerns sort of about the opportunities and burdens of that system. The relationship between neighborhood associations through their coalitions with ONI is very formalized. There's a contract, there's funding that's involved, and they have to jump through a fair number of hoops to enjoy their status, although there are some who have opted out of that formal recognition and go it alone without the benefit of ONI resources. And I want to be sure that we're even-handed, that even as we cast the net a lot wider to bring in more people, that both the resource distribution and the sort of burden we put on people to be able to qualify for certain statuses, for groups to qualify for certain statuses, is even-handed. So I'm not sure if we have policies that that impact that, but operationally, the way ONI works, there are definitely some tiers of how things work, and I want to make sure that the opportunities and burdens are well matched.
Thank you.
I would just like to say, I think the way you described the role and acknowledgement of the neighborhood associations is appropriate, but it also points to, back to the previous conversation of community as, to me, it's an evolution. We are embracing broader cultures, more ethnicities, and they bring differences. And a way to embrace that difference is to acknowledge that difference in our process of how we do business. And we're just providing some flexibility and kind of an evolution to include them in our processes of acknowledgement and public engagement. And community seems like it is the individuals, whether it's a neighborhood association or it's some other group, but it is the individuals that are part of that make up that community to engage. So I think it's appropriate to have to acknowledge the history and where neighborhood associations have brought us, but it's also acknowledgement to me of our future is going to be a much broader. And to Chris's point, I would say it has to be even-handed too, because there's in saying it gets back to this issue of a citizen. You take on certain responsibilities in engaging in that public process. And so as the community, they take on certain responsibilities also, whether it's the historic neighborhood association or the new community groups, whatever they may be. Howard?
But just to be clear, Andre, it shouldn't be the only voice or a preeminent voice that speaks for the neighborhood. Don't you agree?
No, I'm just saying it's the broader group that we're
Yeah, even-handed, I think is the word you used. So that's inclusive, not exclusive.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Michelle?
So are we talking about a policy that extends funding to these other undefined communities?
Well, it seems to me if you're going to be even-handed, yes, you're actually, and I don't know how that policy works out, but you can't say we want your input.
I understand. So where does the funding live? I mean, it's not in the comp plan, right?
It's ONI.
Right. So this policy wouldn't direct that specifically. That, as you say, it's evolving, and so ONI could, over time, change its funding allocation or the procedures under which a neighborhood association might qualify for funding. There could be different rules, but this is a little more general and just providing a foundation for that kind of consideration over time. But we wouldn't be providing that level of detail here. So,
well, I just want to maybe paraphrase what I think I'm hearing. So, right now we have a proposal to expand the introduction, and then I'm hearing from Chris a desire, and maybe it's a new policy, maybe it's not, maybe it has another home, but at least a value or a desire to have better clarification on the I can't say this word, operational. Yes.
Operationalize.
Thank you. Of just number one, the resources as well as the burden to qualify. And I think I want to think about that, and I want to think about whether or not Chapter 2 is the right home for that. But I think you raise a really valid point, and I understand that right now ONI is currently having that conversation, even within just the neighborhood coalitions, as well as not necessarily an even-handed approach, Andre, but actually an approach that may be looking at more of an equitable as far as the resources between the coalitions, as far as, level of poverty, population, et cetera. And so that conversation is happening right now in the ONI budget conversation. And so it's tricky because we want to be really careful about having budget items or budget direction in policy in the comp plan. But I hear what you're saying, and I think it's worth going back and thinking about it some more.
Yeah, so let me be a little bit more explicit on the 2 points I'm trying to make. One is that, as we broaden our outreach, the resources should follow that so that we're using our resources effectively to get as many voices in the conversation as possible. But then to the historic role of neighborhood associations and the historic regulatory burden that has gone along with that, if we're changing the universe a little bit here so that while neighborhood associations are still a critically important voice, they are certainly not exclusive, and they're one voice among many that we maybe revisit the historical regulatory burden we put on them and see whether it's still merited or if they could operate a little less formally.
Mike?
Well, and regarding the funding, it's not necessarily focused on providing resources to a particular entity or group, but affording potentially more staff interaction. So coming from the city to actually engage with a broader array of folks is another way to look at it. So it's not just does your group get funding or not, but does your group have the opportunity to interact with?
Well, so there's history and two sides to that question. So there have been, in the history of neighbor associations, there have been resources that ebbed and flowed between ONI centrally and the district coalitions. And it's a question of, is the funding paying for staff to go engage with neighborhoods, or is it paying to empower the neighborhoods to engage with us? And from the neighborhood perspective, the empowerment model was much preferred. Other people, I'm sure, had different opinions.
And there has been some evolution in this model over the last few years where the Office of Neighborhood Involvement has been funding 5 diversity and civic leadership organizations following a similar model to funding the coalitions. In this case, it's Urban League, NEA, Latino Network, CIO, and what did I leave out? And URCO, sorry. So those 5 organizations have received some funding following that model. So I could see that there could be more evolution over time as those kinds of pilots continue to be successful and expand beyond that.
I would like to point out that there actually are, there was testimony on 2 items related to the neighborhood system. One I thought was really thoughtful, and it was from the Northeast Business Association, and it was simply stating that we need to encourage and support neighborhood associations to work most closely with business associations. And so I just thought that that was a really thoughtful item of testimony that I received. And then, there also is a new policy that talks about, the desire to support neighborhood associations and further diversify their membership to reflect, the communities which they reflect and represent.
So, Community and Involvement Committee?
Yes. Okay. So shifting gears a little bit, this relates to a topic that definitely impacts you all as the Planning and State Sustainability Commission. Of course, since the Comprehensive Plan in 1980, the Planning Commission, now the Planning Sustainability Commission, has been serving as the state recognized committee for citizen involvement. That has been put on pause. That particular duty has been put on pause within periodic review for the Comprehensive Plan. And so we do have a separate community involvement committee that is serving in that role, and is a little bit of a hybrid in that, Commissioner Shapiro serves as the chair of that particular committee. And so we do have the responsibility to talk about who is going to serve in the ongoing capacity for the state required committee for citizen involvement. And so in the current proposed draft, there is a policy that states that a subcommittee of the Planning and Sustainability Commission serve as the city's Community Involvement Committee. We have received quite a bit of testimony. Well, let me rephrase that. We've received some testimony from two important groups, and that is from the Public Involvement Advisory Council in their letter in November, stating that they feel that an independent body should serve this role. We have also had the CIC, the Community Involvement Committee, at your November 18th work session give a briefing, and within that briefing, they advocated that a separate independent body be the ongoing CIC. So you've heard from two important groups on this matter. So in the staff proposal, kind of weighing this particular testimony, our proposal is to revise policy 2.14, and that instead of it being a subcommittee of the PSC, that it would be an independent body rather than the subcommittee. So I'm going to pause and just see if there's any thoughts on the matter.
Howard?
I agree with the recommendation. I think it's a very important body to keep separate from the PSC and report back to it on a timely fashion. I think what I've missed in the past is that group, which has met faithfully through the years I've served on it, hasn't appeared before us enough or had enough, I think, impact on what the work and the information they share at these meetings is. The selection of this group, which I was a part of, I think it goes back 5 or 6 years, was culled from about 200 applications at the city that wanted to serve. So there's a number of citizens really qualified who want to have an input and a voice in what's going on other than neighborhood groups and so forth. When we made that selection to the CIC that exists today, and most of them are still around, it's a remarkably representative group. And so I not only encourage the independence, I encourage the equity and diversity of that group and keeping it representative of the voices and the faces of Portland, which are changing. I made a comment a moment ago about the homogenous community we live in, and the faces and the voices of that community reflect that right now, and I hope they will continue. So this is a vote and a voice in favor of the wonderful work that group has done in the past and the importance of continuing it independent of our group, unless you guys want to be another committee.
Mike.
Well, the obvious question would be, would there be a PSC rep on that committee? I think it would be good to have a liaison.
There has to be, Mike.
I agree with everything.
And that's a condition. I think one and at least two. I've made this case before you all before to join me in this great work. But the PSC should absolutely, I think, be represented. Not necessarily chair. I think it was designated before as the chair. I don't think that needs to be there.
Just a quick question. Would the BPS role of support change with this change?
Practically, probably not, is my guess. And with the subcommittee that we're staffing that's actually serving you all, we would still staff it.
Okay.
And I think Howard's point as far as, what is the relationship with the CAC, with the Planning Sustainability Commission, and how often there is a coming together or reporting on kind of what they're hearing and what they're seeing. I think that would be really good to operationalize. I'm thinking about kind of our sister cities, city of Lake Oswego and the city of Hillsborough, and they do have a bit more of kind of either a hybrid or an independent model of the CIC. And when I say hybrid, I'm meaning that there are planning commissioners that serve on those groups, but there's other folks that make up the membership of the CIC. And that, for the city of Lake Oswego, for example, they will have, the first hour or two of a planning commission meeting that is dedicated to community involvement conversation. And then at some point, it kind of turns over into the planning commission meeting. And so, and then there's, membership, planning commissioners that serve on the CIC. So there's a little bit more of a tighter, that they're meeting on the same day, for example. City of Hillsborough, again, has members from their visioning committee that now make up the Community Involvement Committee, members from the Planning Commission, and members from neighborhood. So they have kind of a more thought out, what's the representation, what is the makeup of the CIC. So all those things, I think, are very much at play, and I would like to continue having a conversation with you about kind of the operation, can't say that word, of kind of the CIC going forward. I think your feedback would be very, very valuable.
Gary?
Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued by the blended or vertically integrated model that you're describing there, because, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what's accomplished by making the commission and the advisory committee more independent from each other. It seems that since we're involved with the same set of issues, that there needs to be actually more integration rather than less. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't be independently membered, but somehow that connection and what you described with, the meeting that sort of morphs from a community involvement meeting into a commission meeting sounds like a good idea.
Any other questions? Great.
So was there anything else in the staff report or in the testimony that you've read on community involvement policies and or the process that you wanted to raise? Otherwise, I'd be happy to turn it over to Deborah Stein for the next item on the agenda.
There actually was an unboxed item that related to, I think the intent was to include nonprofits as among the groups, and I think the language turned out not to include nonprofits, but was broader in nature. Was there
it was organizations, but
I was just curious if that was intentional to not reference nonprofits specifically, since there are so many around.
Yeah.
Organizations is fine. I was just curious.
Yeah, there was no intention behind it. I think it was just wanting a word that was fairly inclusive of both. Or
on that, I think it's maybe policy 2.1E. Were you planning on, because it says to clarify that nonprofit organizations are included in this term of interest-based and affinity organizations and groups. Are you proposing that goes directly into that policy or just into the glossary? I mean, it's just.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a detailed question.
yeah, I think it would probably be more in the policy. The glossary, I don't know what we would be defining, and so it would be a revision to the policy. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Great.
So this last item is not so much a response to testimony, but it's in fact a response to one of your questions early on. You wanted some clarification of what happens with all of the area-specific plans that currently exist. And we've had a number of questions from the community as well. So I wanted to just take a minute to explain our thinking about this. So we have something like 60 area-specific plans that are in all shapes and sizes and scopes and ages, so quite a bit of variety. We did, early on in the process of developing our initial proposal for the comprehensive plan, we did go through those and try to pull out policies that have been said in 50 different ways in different plans and pull out some of those concepts and build them into the new comprehensive plan. So we definitely look to those for some inspiration and some guidance. But we continue to have this set of 60 or so plans. And so the position that we're advancing now is that all of those plans would remain in effect. And we do have a new policy in the proposal that you've seen, I think it's 1.15, that says basically all those plans continue to be in effect. And unless a situation comes up where we find that a new comprehensive plan policy conflicts with something in an older plan, If that is the case, the hierarchy would state that the new comprehensive plan policy would supersede the older policy. But otherwise, everything that's in the set of existing neighborhood and area-specific plans, they all remain valid. And by remaining valid, what that means is we would continue, city staff would continue to use them in a variety of ways. We look to them in a quasi-judicial land use case. Those plans are consulted on for certain kinds of land use cases. Secondly, when we look at any kind of area-specific legislative action in the future, we would look to any relevant neighborhood or area plan for some guidance. Those plans are also consulted to guide any capital improvements, coordination of capital improvements. We do look to see if there's any guidance in those plans that might help select projects or prioritize. And then finally, and very importantly, I think those plans continue to be very important to guide advocacy for neighborhoods and for communities, to help set priorities for advocacy agendas. So all of those functions continue to be valid, and what we will do in the recommended draft of the plan is build in some language about how those plans would be used as part of the text of the introduction, I think, or in chapter 1. And then we also have a step we'd like to pursue at the advice of our city attorney, which is also to look at some of the language in those plans. And you've had the language, the discussion already of verbs and all of that. And it's a similar issue here. And we want to make sure, because all policies are balancing, we don't want to have a verb used in one of the neighborhood plans that might suggest it's a mandatory or a veto policy. So really we want to just reinforce that idea that the verbs are all balancing. So that we would take that step as well.
It was noted.
Michelle?
Just a question. So looking at the language in 1.15, you talked about like around 60 plans. Were those all by ordinance as opposed to some by resolution? So we capture
Those are by
everything there?
ordinance,
Okay.
right. Now, there are pieces of some of those plans that are adopted by resolution. I think when there's an action agenda at the end of some of the neighborhood plans, those are adopted by resolution, but
But we've
the
captured
other
everything we need
components
to.
are adopted by ordinance, yeah.
So my concern is, and we've just recently had this occur, is the albino plan. And the albino plan saying one thing, communities looking for a different direction, and in fact, what's occurring in our comp plan is a little bit different than the albino plan. And so my concern is that we are very clear, Jill's rubbing his collar, that we're very clear that what takes precedent, and that we're, what part of the plan takes precedent that may drive that other part still, even though they're not perfectly referenced, that I'm trying to, that we're not just picking one part like housing out of a plan and saying that that part drives the whole development of a neighborhood, because we have a greater housing policy in the comp plan, and I don't want someone picking up a neighborhood plan that's 40 years old and saying, here's our housing policy, and we have a housing policy that may be different today. And so I'm not sure how those conflicts are worked out, even though it's not referenced in a comp plan saying specifically in this neighborhood that is not the direction we wanted to go, because we've got a different direction in a comp plan than a 40-year-old neighborhood plan.
Some of these choices will have to be situation specific at the time that those conflicts might arise, and we have to decide, is it a conflict or is it just a different interpretation? It's gonna always be a little bit different, so it's gonna be pretty case specific.
I guess my concern is we ran into this with, we have PDC that has money and does housing, and they pick up plans and say, here's we're following their recommendation in Northeast was we're following the albino plan.
I see.
And so if they pick up a plan in East County and say we're following the East County plan or whatever.
Yeah.
Our housing plan may be different, but PDC is funding on a 30-year-old plan. And I'm that was a big issue, and it kind of got blown out of proportion, but it has real impacts.
Sure.
Well, that's a great question, Andre. And part of what we're trying to do is pull the principles that were developed in these neighborhood plans, because really the comprehensive plan in the past was updated through this series of neighborhood plans till we stopped that system and started another and started another. So over that whole arc of years, there's ideas that really are citywide that we want to pull up and make sure they're there. Ideally, we'd be able to go through and sort of clean up each of these neighborhood plans, but we don't really have the resources and not sure it's the most effective thing to do. But I think what we've learned is that there's still an important role for neighborhood-specific strategies, but we don't want to necessarily pull all the important parts of those into something that's so hard to change and so sort of rippled through the big system as the comprehensive plan is. Like, it's the right place for some of that stuff, but these are action strategies for a variety of parties. And when we get back to doing that kind of planning, I hope that that's more of the tool that we adopt than trying to just keep adding sort of sifted things onto the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan should be the easy place to go see what the guiding principle is. That's not saying that there's not local direction where it's needed.
Yeah, I'm just trying to say that, the comprehensive plan's the best and most recent guiding principles, and 40-year-old thoughts might be in conflict, and we ought to somehow have some guidance of how we handle the most recent neighborhood and kind of comprehensive view of the future versus 40 years ago, coming to say, whether it's that had transportation or some other policy, how we might view it.
Yeah.
And balance it. Yeah.
I thought I read it in this that the comp plan, in fact, does trump the older plans.
If there's a conflict,
if there's a
yes.
conflict. But as, yeah.
They're not erased.
Right. So if you can read it so that they're consistent, you have to read it so they're consistent. But if you can't reconcile them, this would prevail.
Right. And that would be the hierarchy.
And since it would be applied to quasi-judicial cases as well, so there's going to be a variety of different bodies using this. So the interpretation could bump into an issue like Andre is saying.
No, you're right, Mike. I just, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and what I was referring to is what we do with the existing plans that, we have a legacy of plans, but we also will be providing some more guidance to ourselves about how we do plans in the future. And so as we start to do some refinement plans or some area-specific plans or action plans like Joe was talking about, we want to give ourselves some guidance to make sure we don't set up a situation where we have potential new conflicts, but instead we're doing a more area-specific refinement, zooming in to a degree we're not able to do at the comprehensive plan stage. And then how do we structure those plans to be most useful and complementary with the direction of the comprehensive plan? So we'll have maybe a new model for how we would do that.
Okay. I just would say, if there's some way to kind of sunset some of those in long term, because we're looking at 20 years, and some of them are going to be.
Some of them already are quite old.
And so,
Yeah. And, I would hope that individual neighborhoods and communities would take a look at some of the plans they have where maybe they're generations past the folks who put that original plan together, and I wonder if, they would want to do some refreshing, not to be adopted by ordinance as a replacement plan, but really as their own advocacy agenda. How well does an old plan still reflect the values of the people who live there today and where they want to be? And I think some neighborhoods might take a look at some of their plans and say, we really are, in a different place today, and we'd like to think about new aspirations or a different vision statement and so forth. So we haven't gone through that exercise, but I would encourage people to do that just on their own.
Okay, thank you. Howard?
Yeah, just quickly, since I've been on the commission, there's always been these dueling plans, one superseding the other and overriding the other. And so just for clarification, the comprehensive plan will be the ruling authority of plans. Other plans will fit into it as indicated and necessary or as informed, and not necessarily go out of style, but be melded into that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, in some cases they add some sort of local flavor, or apply some of the concepts in a localized way. But really, the comprehensive plan would be at the top of that hierarchy.
Howard, the analogy that I've always used with the comprehensive plan, or how we as staff kind of view the different plans, it's like an onion. And so it's the comprehensive plan is like the outermost layer, and then you kind of build down. And I have to add, because I can't help myself with this conversation, but neighborhood plans, I would have to say, have probably one of the best resources of history. And so I, in my role in this as the Southeast District Liaison, I've had the opportunity to read all the neighborhood plans within Southeast Portland. And I have learned so much from them as far as the history and especially with the streetcar era and how areas were developed. So I do think that these plans really are kind of a wonderful resource.
Yeah, I want to second that because I was going through my mind. I'm trying to imagine having been involved, and I have been involved in developing various plans, and I've been around for 40 years, and people start ignoring all that work that was done in the past, and at a minimum, they do provide that kind of history and really important information. So just to jettison them is not a great idea. I think it needs need to be very thoughtful about that.
Yeah. And especially as we're looking into future goal growth, issues of displacement, et cetera, I think that historical context is especially important. And simply taking note and keeping the city accountable to what they did promise in the past.
Great. Other comments?
Well,
You want to
go forth and engage.
So I just wanted to summarize as far as what I heard. So I heard, for the most part, the three components or items that I wanted to bring forward to you today, that I got a pretty favorable affirmation to move forward on the staff proposal. So thank you for that. I don't know if I want to necessarily paraphrase everything that you shared with me, but I did hear, definitely some feedback, especially related to that word that I can't pronounce, Chris. And so I want to give that some more thought, with, basically expanding kind of the resources as well as some of the burdens that have been in place for the neighborhood system, and kind of think about that a little bit. And then I did hear some really wonderful feedback related to kind of as we move forward in the ongoing CIC related to your interest in participating and kind of talking about, whether it's the makeup of that particular, of the committee, or how the Planning Sustainability Commission and the CIC can have a closer relationship as, really they're working in partnership on the process and on the content moving forward in planning our city. So really good feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we're in agreement, so great. So we are going to take a break. Pardon? Yeah, we're going to take a break till 5 o'clock, and then we'll have a hearing on the transportation systems plan. Again, if you're here to testify, please fill out a testimonial card in the back, and it will be provided to us at that point for testimony tonight on the transportation systems plan. At 5 o'clock, we'll reconvene and have a hearing for public testimony.
Oh, God, it was spectacular.